Good evening, guys, and you're very welcome to join our Red Mills Nutrition webinar in partnership with the Association of Irish Riding Clubs. We're really pleased to be able to bring this education series to you guys. And I'm really delighted tonight to be joined by both Elaine and Louise from the Association of Irish Riding Clubs, obviously off the back of a really busy weekend with the Connolly's Red Mills sponsored Show Jumping Championships. So delighted to have the girls along. So I think we're going to hear from them now shortly. And then followed by that, then Lorraine Fradl from Connolly's Red Mills is going to present to you a short presentation on the basics of nutrition. So tonight's quite a broad overview on the topic of feeding and supplementation, but we want to hear from your questions. If there are any particular questions that you have throughout the webinar, pop them in the comments and we'll pick them up with Lorraine at the very end. And then if there's any further information that you guys would like kind of as we go forward in the series, any particular topics you'd like us to focus in, you know, by all means, share it in the comments or send us in a message and we'll look to cover those off as well. I suppose just to introduce both the Connolly's Red Mills team, most people are familiar with Connolly's Red Mills, obviously based in Goresbridge, County Kilkenny, but we also work alongside our supplement company, Foran Equine, and Cardea Martin, then the care brand. So our motto is we like to put the horse at the center of everything we do. We're nourishing with feed, supporting with supplementation, and caring with Cardea Martin. So that's hopefully the complete package. We have a lot of online resources available. So again, check out our websites for the likes of the nutritional articles. And there's also a section on the site where you can ask our experts. Any specific questions for our nutrition team, there is an opportunity for you to submit them on the website also. But for the time being, I think we're going to be joined now by Louise and Elaine, I think.
Yep.
Thanks. Guys, how are you?
Hi.
Hi, Jane. Thanks very much for that introduction and also for giving us this presentation this evening. So we are thrilled to have the opportunity to have Red Mills present this educational evening. We've had the AIRC and Red Mills have had a very long-standing relationship. I think we're probably nearly 17, 18 years at this point between show jumping and dressage. And so hopefully our members will be able to gain some more knowledge and expand their knowledge with this presentation this evening.
Yeah. I suppose I'll give a rundown of our great show that we had at the weekend. We had 275 competitors compete over on Sunday. There was 187 riders with 49 clubs representing. So we had our championship classes, the meter 10, meter 10, 20 championship, our meter championship, our 90 championship, our 80 championship, and our 70 championship. And we had Fiona Tansey came and won again this year. She won it last year. And her daughter, Rebecca, actually came third in that class. And second was Mia Brown. Then in the RC 100, we had Kim. There were 6 clears and she was the fastest by like a point of a second. So it was very exciting end to that class. Then the 90 was the biggest class with 65 riders taking part in that class. And only, again, 6 made it through to the jump off with Diane. She's a Tina rider. She won that class as well. It was a great atmosphere at that one as well. Then the 80 championship was won by Clodagh. She's from Strathcona. Clodagh actually won the 70 accumulator in 2023 as well. So it was nice for her to come back and win the championship for that. Then Ria Shaughnessy claimed the title for the RC 70. I have to say in that class, the crowd at the end were just brilliant. They all hung around. It was late in the evening, so it was great atmosphere. Then obviously we had our derbies and the accumulators. Again, like Aoife Farley from O'Cara won the 100 the 100 derby. We actually didn't have a meter 10, meter 20 one this year. Unfortunately, we had a few withdrawals, so the class actually didn't go ahead. Then the 90 derby was won by Moiglair's Caroline Sullivan. Actually, her team Caroline is the secretary for Moiglair. And then the accumulators, we had Druncora's Colleen McSweeney. She won the 80 accumulator. Again, it was a big enough class. And then the 70 accumulator was won by Dylan Enright. He claimed that title again. There wasn't very many clears in that. So it was great excitement for the day, great atmosphere, and just want to say thanks to the judges, the volunteers, course builders, and of course Connolly's for sponsoring the class. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you.
No, you're so welcome. It's like you say, it's a great partnership, and I think probably it's a credit to both teams how long it's been going, and it's definitely something that we look forward to working on every year. So delighted to see you so well supported. But I'm just conscious of time, so we might just introduce now Lorraine Fradl from the Connolly Red Mills nutrition team. So as I say, we'll pass over to Lorraine now. Please do pop any questions into the comments, or if you're streaming online, pop them into the online piece. And a huge thank you to the whole team at the AIRC and to Louise and Elaine for joining us this evening. As I said, it's a great partnership, and hopefully you guys enjoy the evening. So yeah, over to you now, Lorraine.
Hi everyone, thank you Jane for that. It's great to be here to kick off this presentation. So this evening is very much a general nutrition chat, as kind of casual as we like it. So as Jane said, I'd encourage you, if you have any questions, to put them into the comments and we can address them at the end. This evening we're just going to talk about a balanced diet, why that's important, with that in mind, how you'd go about choosing a suitable feed. And then I'm just going to go through a few slides on kind of feeding for top line, feeding for temperament, general questions that we get asked quite a lot. So hopefully some part of it will be useful. But if you have any additional questions, do ask them as we go along and we can answer them all at the end. So when we're talking about a balanced diet for your horse, while it's important that the horse looks very well and it's in good show condition and it to the eye appears healthy, when we talk about a balanced diet, it is also thinking about how well your horse metabolizes the energy. So what you put into them, how efficiently they break it down to use it. Also what we don't see with the naked eye would be how we feed them and how that impacts bone strength and recovery. Also coat and hoof health, which is very visible, and a healthy immune system. So we're always feeding the horse to make sure that they're in good body condition, and that's going to come from your macronutrients, so your carbohydrates, your starches, sugars, fiber, your protein and your oils, but also that we consider that we're getting the right level of vitamins and minerals into them, which is going to support a healthy immune system and the likes of your bone strength and your recovery. So deficiencies or an imbalance can be detrimental to health and performance. So for your young horses in particular, your bone strength and recovery piece is going to be very important. But for your older horses, the likes of having a healthy immune system, that if they're out competing every weekend, that they're not picking up snots and coughs along the way because they're maybe lacking something in the diet. So it's the whole picture, that they look well, that they're getting everything they need, and how do we go about doing that? So when we talk about choosing a suitable feed or supplements, we have a lot of things to consider. So their age, we're not going to feed an old horse the same as a kind of middle-aged mature horse, or again the same as a young horse. So our younger horses are going to need a little bit more protein in their diet to support growth and recovery. An older horse maybe needs a softer feed, maybe has some dental issues, and you're kind of anything from 6 up until 15, where they become old, is really subjective and really horse dependent. But in that kind of age margin, you're thinking, okay, well, after your hay, what do I need to provide enough energy for my horse? Weight is important. So obviously if your horse is overweight, you need to make sure it's getting enough vitamins and minerals into the diet without adding too many calories. Their height along with their weight is going to determine how much of a hard feed you give them and how much hay you give them. Their breed type is going to be very dependent on their metabolism. So we see with kind of your cold-blooded horses, the likes of your draft, you generally speaking don't need to feed them quite as much as your hot-blooded horses, like the thoroughbred, for example, who metabolizes their feed faster than the cold-blooded ones. Body condition, as already mentioned, so if they're on the heavy side, if they're on the light side, you're going to feed those two differently. The level of exercise and the discipline you're aiming for. So the level of exercise, if you're riding your horse maybe 3 days a week and competing 1 day at the weekend, that horse is going to be fed very differently to a horse that's full-time in the field, or very differently to a horse that's competing at a higher level and is being exercised maybe 1 or 2 times a day and doing a 2-day show at the weekend. And being conscious of that when we increase or reduce work, we need to look at the feed that we're giving and adjust that accordingly. Forage quality is something that we just have to talk more and more about, because in Ireland it can be difficult to get good quality hay or haylage. And when I talk about good quality, I'm talking about it being clean, hygienic, free from molds, yeast, mycotoxins. Forage is the basis of every diet, so we always start there, and then we build up the hard feed around that if it's necessary at all. So if you have, the other thing with forage quality you're looking at is how digestible it is. So if you have a horse that looks at food and puts on weight, that kind of horse, you're looking for an older, stemmier cut hay, one that has a lower sugar content and is more fibrous, so you can provide them plenty of it without them putting on too much weight. If you have a horse that's quite challenging to condition, you can give them an earlier cut hay. Temperament, and we'll talk about a little bit more about this, but if you have a horse that's very laid back, you want something and you want more horse underneath you, you're going to feed him very differently to a horse that gets very excitable. And then nutrition concerns. So if you have a horse that's prone to ulcers, if you have a horse that's prone to tying up, if you have a horse with laminitis, with Cushing's, so any of those metabolic disorders or diseases, there's a lot of those that we can base a nice diet to suit those horses. That would be quite different to your horse that doesn't have it. And then the environment. Is your horse stabled full time? Is he living out? If he's living out, maybe he has plenty of grass and the hay or the haylage isn't going to be as quite important. If he's stabled full time, maybe he's getting quite excitable in the winter time, and you need to look at changing the feed to more slow release energy. So in order to understand how to choose a feed suitable for your horse, to feed for temperament, to feed for condition, we always go back and discuss the equine digestive system. So I hope this is clear enough for everyone to see. But the beginning of the digestive system, the horse ingests the feed, it breaks it down with its teeth, and then it moves down through the esophagus into the stomach. So the stomach and the small intestine are the foregut, and they're the smaller part of a horse's digestive system. So in the stomach and the small intestine, the horse is trying to break down some of the sugars, starches, protein, and oils. So there's quite a lot to do there, considering it's the smallest part. And then the foregut, which you will see it kind of in the background of that, is the largest part. So horses are hindgut fermenters, which means they're very efficient at digesting fiber, but not quite as efficient at digesting the aforementioned. So the sugars, the starches, protein, oils. So they're really designed to digest fiber, and that's why we're always saying feed horses fiber ad lib. They should be eating as much as possible. Horses constantly are excreting acid into the stomach to break down the fibers. So horses evolved as being out in the wild, eating bad quality grasses, and they evolved that way to survive because there was less competition for that type of grass. So we have changed the horse by domesticating it and putting it in a stable and asking it to exercise, but the digestive system hasn't caught up with that. So we have to be really, really conscious of that when we're feeding our horse, that we're not overloading the foregut with those starches and more difficult things to digest, and being conscious that starch, while it is important, particularly for a more laid back horse, if you're going to feed it, that we provide it in an easy to digest format, so that you're picking a feed or even if it's a raw material, that's ideally steam cooked or flaked. So you're increasing the digestibility and giving your horse the best chance at digesting those cereal grains in that foregut before it reaches the hindgut. If we do have a lot of starches going through the foregut and the passage is quite quickly, you're talking about 1 to 2 hours, and reaching the hindgut, we can get digestive disturbances. So you can see loose droppings. Horses, their droppings will start to smell badly, their performance reduces, and they're just generally not very well in themselves. So every time we're choosing a feed, we're thinking about their body condition, their temperament, that they're getting all the vitamins and minerals, but also about this digestive system, and that we're picking something that's not going to cause any damage to it. So forage, we always say it's the most important part of the diet. So your horse should consume a minimum of 1%, 1.5% of body weight in forage every single day. So in very simple terms, if you have a 15 to 16 hand sport horse of an average build, they're going to be around 500 kilos. So you're looking that they're being provided with 7.5 kilos in forage dry matter every day. And the dry matter is an important point because 7.5 kilos of grass isn't the same as 7.5 kilos of hay. So your hay is in around 85 and up % dry matter. Your haylage is going to be wetter. So when we're talking about dry matter, we're talking about everything the hay or the haylage contains minus the water that it's holding. So your horse is probably going to eat 30 kilos of grass versus 7 or 8 kilos of hay. But when we're talking about feeding in the wintertime in particular, because the grass is too difficult to manage, their intake or know how much they're eating, that's the aim. So you build up around that. So a horse is, generally speaking, going to eat 2.5% of their body weight in feed every day, and at least 1.5% of that should be in forage. If you have a very laid back horse that you want to kind of give more hard feed to give them energy, then the 1.5% is fine, and your other 1% will come from the concentrate feed. If you have a horse that's very, very hot in himself, but actually doesn't need too much weight, you can up the amount of forage. So you just never really want to fall below the 1.5, but it's fine to move up from that as well. So as I already mentioned, this is because horses are hindgut fermenters. So it's going to be essential for a healthy gut that there's fiber source moving through the digestive system the whole time, and the horse is chewing, maintaining a good pH balance in the hindgut, and that's going to keep them happier and healthier. The forage as well is slow release energy. So if you have something very excitable, you're aiming for forages, fibers and oils rather than your cereal grains. So your sources: hay, grass, haylage, chopped alfalfa. Beet pulp, you can consider it a forage, but it's not going to give you the same amount of chew time, which is really important to keep horses busy. So very important fiber source, but not going to take the amount of time to eat it. So when we talk about, again, choosing a feed, the first question we always ask is about temperament, particularly when it's a performance horse, because we don't want, if your horse is really laid back, we don't want to be providing them with the wrong sources. So with what we would call super fibers, the likes of beet pulp, soya hulls, alfalfa, they can provide the same amount of calories per kilo as oats. But if you feed one versus the other, the results you get from your horse or the feel you get from your horse will be very different. So when we talk about starches and sugars, we're talking about fast release energy. That means that they're primarily digested in the foregut. So they go in, they're chewed down into the stomach, and when they get into the small intestine, the horse digests them quite quickly. So they're pulling the energy up into the bloodstream, and it's available quite quickly to the horse. So if you have a very hot horse, you want to avoid those fast release energy sources. Your fibers and your oils we consider to be slow release energy. So that means that the horse digests them a lot slower, and they're available. They're kind of the energy that they provide is trickled slowly into the bloodstream. So you don't get that big burst of energy like you would with the cereal grains. So if you have too much energy, if you're feeding your horse maybe too many cereals, you're not going to have the same control and the focus as you would if it's on a steady source. And if your horse has too little energy and kind of lacks impulsion and presence, you want to be giving that fast release energy into your horse to give them a bit more underneath you as such. So when we talk about the fast release, we're generally talking about, for horses, it's your cereal grains. So your oats, your barley, your maize, wheat can be fed to horses, but it's not included usually in large amounts. And when we're talking about our fibers and our oils, good sources of oils would be linseed oil, carron oil, cod liver oil, if they'll eat it, but ones with a high omega-3 content. And if we're talking about our fibers, it's your soya hulls, your beet pulp, alfalfa pellets, your hay, obviously. They're the kind of ones that you're looking for on the back of a bag of feed. And just before I go on to, because we're going to start talking about feeding for temperament and top line, just to say, on the back of a bag of feed, like every feed company generally will have a nutritionist at the end of the phone. So if you have a question about any of our feeds, you can contact us through the Ask the Expert form online, or you can just pick up the phone and you'll be transferred through to someone. But if you're in a feed store and you're walking around and you're not really sure what you need, turn the bag over and look at the ingredients, because if you know what's giving you fast release energy and slow release energy, the ingredients are listed in order of weight. So the first, if the first ingredient on a bag of feed is oats, that means the feed has more oats than it does the last ingredient, which is probably your vitamins and minerals. So if the first three ingredients are oats, barley, maize, that feed is going to be quite high in starch and provide a lot of fast release energy. If your first three ingredients are soya hulls, alfalfa pellets, and beet pulp, that's going to provide a lot more slow release energy. So look at the ingredients as well as the breakdown, and it will give you a good indication if you're in a situation where you can't ask for help. So the next few slides, we're going to talk about feeding for temperament, feeding for top line, feeding for hoof and coat condition, and then weight gain and weight loss. And as I said, it's a lot of the questions we get asked, so hopefully something in it will be relevant to you and your horse. So when we're talking about feeding for temperament, the first thing we say is the energy that you're putting in matching the workload that you're asking the horse to do? So is your horse, a happy hacker and not, you want it nice and laid back, but then you're giving a lot of cereal grains, it doesn't match up. So if your horse is more prone to being excitable, you're always looking for a lower starch feed, higher fibers, and oil if you need condition. And if they're more excitable in terms of supplements, you can use calmers with key ingredients such as magnesium, L-tryptophan, and B vitamins. So they're the kind of key vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients that you need. If your horse is more laid back, you're thinking about the inclusion of grain in the diet. So including cereal grains such as oats, barley, and maize, making sure that they're there in a digestible form so that the feed manufacturer has processed them, that they're flaked and they're either steam cooked or cooked in another fashion. And when we're talking about supplementing a laid back horse, consider the likes of the pre-fuel gel, branched chain amino acids for energy. So you're talking about very digestible amino acids that you can give to a horse. They break down quite quickly, and those kind of things you can use on show day. So if he's laid back, maybe you've done one day of a show and you're on to your second day, the likes of the pre-fuel gel can be very useful if he's a little bit dead in himself going into the ring the second time. So too excitable, you're cutting out the starches. A little bit too laid back, include your starches, just make sure they're processed. And in terms of the forage, hay versus haylage, there's it really depends. There's often in your early cut hay, you're going to have a little bit more sugar than in your haylage because it's been fermented. But with your haylage, you are going to need to feed more of it to get up to that 1.5% dry matter intake. So it's a balance really of weight as well as temperament when you're choosing your forage. Top line development, I'd say this is one of the top questions we get asked because obviously it's important and people like to see their horses strong and in show condition. But when we talk about top line, we can never talk about it just as the feed. We have to talk about it exercise as well. So you have to be working your horse in order for the horse to target those muscle groups. And when you work your horse, those muscles are breaking down, and the feed that you're putting in, if it's appropriate, will help build them back up. And every time you build them back up, break them down, build them up, they get bigger and stronger. So that's how your top line is developed. So you can feed the best feed in the world, but if you're not putting in the appropriate exercise to target those muscle groups, it's not going to have a big impact on top line. So exercise alongside calories, alongside quality protein is the key to top line. So exercise, you're stimulating the muscle, and the calories are there that when you exercise the horse, they're helping build it back up. But the protein is one of the macronutrients that breaks down into amino acids. Making sure that you have quality protein in the diet is going to be really important to, again, target that muscle group and feed the muscle with what it needs. So when we talk about protein in the horse's diet, we're often talking about lysine, and that's what you'll often see. It will be what's declared on a lot of feed bags, and it's what the nutritionists are always going to be talking about, because it's an amino acid that is what we call the limiting amino acid. So it's probably the most important amino acid to the horse, but one that's often there in the lowest quantity in the likes of your forage. So you can have a forage that is between 8 and 11% protein, but the majority of that protein isn't very digestible to the horse because the quality of the protein is quite poor. So the lysine content is low. When you're looking for a feed with a high lysine content, you're looking at the percentage of protein in the diet, the amount you're feeding, because if you have a 14% feed, that means you're giving 140 grams of protein per kilo fed. If you have a 10% feed, you're giving 100. But if you're feeding 1 kilo versus 2 kilos, your 10% feed, you're actually giving more protein per day. So do consider the percentage on the bag, the amount you're feeding your horse per day of that feed alongside the forage that you're feeding, and also where the protein is coming from. So when we're talking about lysine, you can find synthetic lysine added to some feeds and supplements, but in its, I suppose, natural format, we would always be trying to include soybean. That would be your most, it would have naturally high levels of lysine. So you're looking ideally for soybean extruded or full fat soya in your ingredient list to provide that essential lysine for top line. Coat condition and hoof health, we often talk about these together because hair and hoof are mainly made of keratin. And again, we're looking for quality protein. That's going to be really important to feed that and push on the growth and the strength of both. When we're talking about hoof health, you're looking at a balanced diet, and a balanced diet will often rectify a lot of those problems, particularly looking at zinc, at copper, and at amino acids. And also, if your horse struggles with hoof strength, you could consider adding in therapeutic levels of biotin. So biotin would be the main ingredient in most of the hoof supplements, alongside maybe some B vitamins, zinc, copper, amino acids. B vitamins, because often they're produced in the hindgut, and if your horse doesn't have a healthy hindgut, they're not going to produce those vitamins. So while it's great to add in a supplement, do consider the overall picture of the diet and how well your horse is performing, as well as looking at the feet. And then for coat condition, if your horse is it's a little bit dry in its coat and everything else is right, the diet is balanced, you could consider supplementing with an omega-3 rich oil. So your omega-3 oils that you would be feeding to horses would be linseed oil, Caron oil, which is an emulsified linseed oil, or cod liver oil. Cod liver oil would have the highest levels of the most efficient omega-3 fats in the diet, but a lot of horses don't like the taste of it. So if you have a fussy horse, go with the linseed or the Caron oil. And then sometimes another complaint or comment we get from horses that have been out on grass. So maybe horses that around this time of year, grass is plentiful, they're living out, and they have enough body condition that they really don't need any feed at all. Sometimes after a few weeks, they'll get a copper tinged coat. And it's kind of a yellowy tinge through their coat. You see it more in bays and chestnuts and darker horses because you notice the change in the color quite quickly. And that can often be a copper deficiency. So copper, unlike other minerals, copper and zinc are taken in by the horse and they're stored in the liver of the horse. And the horse just pulls from those liver stores as they need it. So we can't actually do a test to see what levels a horse has of copper. So, but we know also that we can give a little bit more copper and it's not going to cause any harm. So if your horse is out on grass and you want to avoid that problem, supplementing with either a weekly dose of copper or twice a week or a smaller amount once a day will help avoid that problem. So just one quick little slide on assessing your horse's body condition. So there's two different scales. There's a 1 to 5 and a 1 to 9. Both are very widely available online, and we have the chart on the Red Mills site, so you can find it there and have it in your yard. But you're always looking for a nice balanced amount of condition along their neck, their middle, across their shoulder, their top line and their sides, and then over their hindquarters as well. Keeping in mind the age of your horse, because an older horse is going to struggle a little bit more with their top line. And then also considering a horse with maybe Cushing's, where the fat deposits sit often in funny places. So keep in mind your horse's age, if he has any metabolic syndromes, but use your body condition score and try and get into the habit of doing it once a month, that someone maybe pulls your horse out and stands him up and you run through it. Because I think often a lot of us are guilty of, if you're looking at the horse every single day in grooming it, tacking it up, it's very difficult to see a change in condition. So if your horse's body condition is going, ideally we like it to be somewhat the same, that it's not increasing rapidly or decreasing rapidly, but it's a nice thing to do to keep an eye on it. Weight tapes can be very useful as well for keeping an eye on changes in your horse's weight, as well as weigh bridges if there is one available to you in the yard. So feeding for weight gain. When we want horses to put on weight and we need them to put on weight quite quickly, oil is the densest source of calories. So oil gives about 2.5 times more calories per gram than your carbohydrates, your protein, or your fibers. So, and the other advantage of oil is it's non-heating. So it doesn't break down very quickly, that they get that big energy burst. So you can feed oil quite safely without changing their temperament. And when we're talking about what oil to use, like we mentioned the linseed oil, but we would also be adding oil into the feed. So you can buy oil separately and top dress your feed with it, or you can look at feeds that provide a high level of oil. So if you're looking at a feed that has no added oil and the oil in it is all coming from what's naturally occurring in the grains and the fiber sources, it's going to be in around anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5% on the bag. If you see anything that's more than 3.5%, it's likely that oil has been added. And oil can be very safely fed to horses for up to 10% of the diet, which is quite extreme. That's alongside your forage as well. And we don't tend to see it, but we know from studies done that it is very safe. But with oil, you need to introduce it slowly, because they can get a little bit soft on it. And we also know in terms of how efficiently they digest it, it takes kind of 4 to 6 weeks to adapt a horse from a low oil diet to a very high oil diet. So if you're just adding a little bit of oil, you'll see the results quite quickly. In about 3 to 4 weeks, you'll see horses gaining weight. You'll see it in their skin and their coat. But if you have a very light horse, or you're an endurance rider that is doing a very high level of exercise at a low speed, the adaptation to a higher oil diet, you're really wanting to factor in that 4 to 6 weeks before they adapt fully. On kind of our side, we would say if you have a very excitable horse that's difficult to hold condition, choosing a feed that has quite a lot of oil in it, oil and fibers, is going to be really beneficial to their temperament and their weight. Or if you have a horse that looks well, but maybe is having a hard season, he's very busy, he's out competing every weekend, and you just feel that he's lacking a little bit, putting a top dress in on top of their normal feed can be really useful. So the likes of the Define and Shine, where you're just feeding 1 to 2 mugfuls per day. So you're not making massive changes to his diet. His diet is already balanced. You're just adding something in. That's a really nice solution, because then you can take it out when he gets that desired weight, or you can take it out when his workload drops. So feeding the good doer, and it can be difficult at this time of year, because we want horses to be out on as much, out as much as possible. But obviously this time of year, there can be a lot of grass. So if you're trying to reduce weight on your horse, these are the things you need to consider. So when it comes to hard feed, if you feel your horse is on a forage only diet and he really has no zing, he's no life in him, it might not be because you've removed the cereals. It might be because there's a vitamin or mineral deficiency present, because we do know when horses are only fed hay or grass, they are often going to be deficient with the hay in a lot of vitamins and some minerals, and with the grass with some minerals. So if they're on a hay or a grass only diet, consider feeding a low calorie balancer. So the balancers are in 1 kilo of what we would call a complete feed. Your balancer is going to provide you're only going to need to feed about 250 grams to get the same amount of vitamins and minerals in that as there is in about 1 kilo of complete feed. So you're feeding a very small amount of it, but it's very, very dense in amino acids, which are going to be important for your top line and your recovery, and your essential vitamins and minerals. So you're feeding a very small amount, and obviously alongside a higher level of long stem fiber. With your fiber, you're looking at choosing a later cut hay, so a stemmier hay ideally. That's going to be a coarser hay. In Ireland, we mainly have perennial ryegrass growing in the country, though there is more introductions to different types of varieties. So a lot of our hay is ryegrass, which is generally very digestible. But so if you can pick something that's been cut late, that could be beneficial to your horse. Or if you have access to a Timothy hay, that's generally lower in sugar and higher in fiber fractions. So it takes them a little bit longer to eat, and they don't gain the same amount of calories from it. If you have a horse that's out and has to be out full time, whether it's for temperament or just your stabling conditions, at this time of year, you might consider restricting the grass intake by using a muzzle or by strip grazing. And then the other thing you can consider is turning them out overnight. So if they need to be out, bring them in during the day and out by night when the sugar levels in the grass are a little bit lower. And horses out overnight tend to eat less, so they do most of their eating in daylight hours. Feeding for recovery is an interesting one, because obviously you're in the height of your show season. So when we talk about feeding for recovery, there's lots of things we can talk about, but it's important that your horse is entering the competition in a good state, and then you're supporting it afterwards, that they recover quicker. So the time of recovery is going to be based on the horse's status at the beginning, as well as how quickly you help them afterwards. So the time taken to replenish electrolytes has a direct impact on the time taken for your horse to recover. So the quicker you can get electrolytes into them that are lost after exercise, the quicker they're going to kind of bounce back and be ready to go again. So when we're talking about electrolytes, horses lose an awful lot of electrolytes, so salts, sodium chloride, potassium, and magnesium. They sweat a lot. They lose a lot of water to cool themselves down, and in that sweat, you're going to lose a lot of the electrolytes. So particularly at this time of year, when it's hotter, or maybe not terribly hot, but muggy anyway, if your horse is sweating, they need to be replaced. So if your horse is on a high enough level of feed and it's fully balanced with vitamins and minerals, they might need everyday electrolytes. But if you're on a show day where your horse is traveling, so he's going to maybe lose some electrolytes prior to the competition, then he's competing and traveling back home again, those days are going to be really important. So generally speaking, I would recommend electrolytes 3 to 4 days before a show if they're not generally given. And then after the show, so if your horse is come out of the ring, he should be cooled down, his breathing rate should be back to normal, his heart rate back to normal, and offered water. And once he has access to water, you can give him an electrolyte. So the electrolyte pastes are very convenient. We have the refuel gels, so you just give a full gel straight down into his mouth, and you're replenishing then not only the electrolytes, but it also contains B vitamins, which are going to stimulate appetite. That's really important in a lot of young horses that maybe are going away to their first shows and they come back and it's all been a little bit much and they go off their feed for a few days. So that's fine if they don't have a show for 6 weeks, but if they have a show the following week, you really do like them to be eating back on their feed again. And also from a gut health perspective, that they are eating and there's food going into the stomach to soak up that acid that's constantly excreting. So you have your electrolytes, your B vitamins, antioxidants are also included in that paste, and your antioxidants are basically little warriors that come in and try and sweep up all of the bad toxins that have been released prior or post exercise. So when, as we talked about with the top line and the muscle activation, when we ask our horses to work, there's energy going to the muscles, but those muscles are letting out free radicals. So the antioxidants come in, they mop all those up, so they scavenge them, sort them all out, clean them up, so it reduces the amount of muscle damage that your horse has, which is caused by intense work. So you're putting everything in basically all in one go. So that is useful. If you don't want to use a paste, do consider giving them electrolytes maybe through their water or through a small feed as soon as they have cooled down. B vitamins you can leave out if they don't have an issue with appetite, but do consider upping the antioxidant levels a few days post hard work. So your antioxidants that would be beneficial, selenium, vitamin E, vitamin C, they'd be the most commonly used ones in horses. So we've already talked a bit about this, but I'll run through it again. So we were saying the equine sweat is hypertonic. So that means that they lose an awful lot of salts when they sweat. And it is important to regulate the acid-base balance. So if they lose too much and they don't go in, your horse isn't going to perform as well. It's important for nerve impulse transmission and muscle contraction. It's important for the heart, and it's important for movement of food and water through the gut. So when we think of electrolytes, we just think of sweat and get it back in, but it serves a huge amount of functions in the body. So making sure that it's replenished as soon as possible is going to reduce the incidence of muscle cramps, of reduced stamina, of tying up, and of poor post-exercise recovery. So if you have a horse that comes out the day after a show and has gone into that show very fit and healthy and comes out completely dead, do consider the electrolyte status and whether you need to factor that into the diet. And then just one other point to cover off: traveling and stabling away from home. We often get asked, should I change the diet? My horse is going away, he's going to be doing a lot more work. I would always say with horses, keep the diet and your routine as consistent as possible to the way it is at home. So if you feed 3 times at home, try and keep your feeding times the same. You shouldn't, even if your horse is increasing the amount they're doing, try not to change feed. So if you feel your horse is a little bit laid back at a show towards the end of the week, don't go pushing loads of cereals into them, because every change you make has to be slow to allow the digestive system to adapt. So if you feel they're a little bit laid back and sluggish towards the end of the week, check your electrolyte status. Consider a supplement to increase your branched chain amino acids, or just give a little bit more of the feed they're already on, but try not to change the feed the week or the few days you're away. If your horse is fussy, consider bringing your own water, even if it's just for a few days. If it's going to be for a week, you could consider adding a flavoring to your water at home a week before you go, and then putting that flavoring into the water that's on site. That's only really necessary in extreme conditions, but it is really important if your horse is fussy about it, because they will dehydrate if they're not drinking enough. If you can, bring your own hay or haylage, again, so there's no sudden changes to the diet, because if you're feeding hay at home and you go to a show, they're only providing haylage, a big change like that is going to have a negative impact on their hindgut, and the performance is going to be drastically reduced. You can consider, if you're traveling quite a distance, to start adding oil to the diet a few days before they go. Oil lubricates the digestive tract and just keeps things moving along. Sometimes when horses travel for long periods, because they're not moving and because they're not drinking generally enough water during transit, they can get a little bit bunged up. The likes of beet pulp or your mashes are very good for fluids and for hydration, so it can hide some of the supplements you might want to be adding in, and you can use it as wet or as dry as you want. So if you feel your horse isn't drinking very well, make a big sloppy mash, and at least he's getting that bit of water into him. And then help with recovery by including electrolytes. So in summary, things to consider for your overall diet: are you feeding enough forage? Is your horse maintaining a healthy weight? Does he need to gain weight, lose weight when you're thinking about your feed? What type of energy suits your horse best? Is he laid back? Is he quite hot? Are you feeding enough good quality protein to support top line and to support energy to support young growing horses? Are your vitamin and mineral requirements being met, and is the diet balanced? And could a supplement help to address a specific concern, so without having to change the diet? So that is a brief summary. I hope there's plenty of questions, because I know it's not terribly specific, but hopefully this will be a starting point. And if there's topics that people are interested in, please do let us know, and we'd be delighted to come back and do something similar again on something more specific. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to attempt to answer them. If you want to pop them into the comments bar, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lorraine. Really appreciate that. Was super. I've just got a couple of questions that have come in there. One is just, if you suspect that maybe your horse is got some maybe gastric issues going on, and you maybe suspect they're maybe got a little bit of discomfort, what would you recommend sort of the steps be in terms of tackling that?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is, if you're suspecting that and you're worried, do get the vet. The only way you can diagnose gastric ulcers is through gastroscope. So a vet can obviously look after that. And the only way you can treat gastric ulcers is either through rest, where a horse goes out to the field and they recover naturally because they have their head down and they're eating all the time, or that you treat medicinally. So there's no supplement on the market that's going to make gastric ulcers disappear. So that's the first step I would take. The next thing I would do is look at management. So if your horse is diagnosed with gastric ulcers and you would like him to continue work, you can treat him, but you have to look at what you're doing with the horse. So there's no point putting medication into him for 4 or 6 weeks and then not considering, well, what's causing this? So with gastric ulcers, it can be intermittent feeding. So maybe a horse isn't eating enough long stem forage throughout the day, and there's long periods of time where he's not eating. That's going to cause gastric ulcers. If you have a very stressy type horse, just temperament alone can cause gastric ulcers. And if you're exercising horses at high speeds where they're, galloping, they can suffer with acid splash, where the acid, maybe there's not any food in the stomach and the acid is splashing up and damaging the upper part of the stomach. So consider the causes of it, and maybe can you give that horse, if he's stressed, can you give him more turnout time? If there's big gaps in the day, can you maybe give him a hay net with smaller holes in it if he doesn't need any more weight, that he can eat a little bit slower? Can he be maybe beside a friend in a companion box that he's a little bit more calm? So all things like that. And then if you have all of that covered off, you could consider a supplement on top of a low starch diet. So lowering the starch is going to help their temperament and also going to help the amount of acid that's being excreted in the stomach, but also a supplement with the likes of pectin, amino acids, prebiotics, postbiotics, that can just support the whole digestive tract from the stomach right through to the foregut or the hindgut. The other thing is that I think we know a lot about gastric ulcers now, but sometimes the hindgut health is a little bit neglected. So where people think, my horse isn't really in great form, his droppings look bad, he's a bit grumpy, he's not himself the way he had been. Maybe it's not gastric ulcers, maybe it's a hindgut issue. So consider both and discuss them both with your vet.
Perfect. That's ideal. Thank you. Lorraine, you mentioned as well, say, building up to a big competition or maybe traveling. You mentioned giving a little bit more of the feed that you're already on. But I suppose to be able to do that, you need to know how much you're feeding. How important is it that we kind of weigh our scoops, or weigh, because everyone's scoop is different nearly, not just the physical scoop, but you can have a heap scoop or a shallow scoop of feed. Everyone has their unique way of doing it. How important is it that we weigh our feed?
Look, it's just a nice to know, and particularly if you're looking for advice, it's very useful to be able to say to a nutritionist, I'm giving 2 kilos of this feed in the morning and 1 kilo of this in the evening, because then we can assess if they're getting the right level of vitamins, minerals, amino acids. But for yourself, I suppose, is it, if you're not looking for advice, is it important? No, but maybe the same person should be feeding that horse every day, because the difference in a level scoop and a heap scoop could be about 750 grams, which is a huge amount when you think if that person is feeding the horse for a week and then a different person that feeds a heap scoop feeds it the next week. So it is a nice thing to do. But I would say, like, it has to come back to as well feeding with your eye a little bit. And if you see a horse is getting light, to be able to give it a little bit more. If you see it's getting a bit heavy, back off the feed a little bit and add in your balancer to make sure they're not being left with kind of gaps in the diet.
Ideal. Perfect. And then I suppose from that perspective too, it's so important just to know your horse and pay attention to those little signals, as you say, be able to kind of judge with your eye. You mentioned as well just the ingredients on the back of the bag. Is there, and we talk a lot about the quality of ingredients, is there anything in particular that people should look out for, that suggests that it's a complete quality lineup of ingredients in the feed, and understanding how to read the feed label?
Well, I think, like, we obviously talk so much about low starch diets because we know the implications it can have on temperament when you feed too much. But there is plenty of horses that they do need that bit of fast release energy. So if you're going to feed that, look at your feed bag. It should be, what we're trying to do is we're saying, okay, a horse doesn't give itself a whole lot of time to digest the starches. So let's start the process off. So with the red mills feed, for example, we're steam cooking it. So we're increasing the surface area of the grain, and then we've started cooking it. So it's, you know, you're eating a cooked potato instead of a raw potato. So you've started the process for the horse. So once it gets to their foregut, it's very available to them. So I would say, look at the cooking processes. Like, cooking is going to increase the digestibility. And the likes of your protein sources, is there a good source of protein? Because a 14% feed, you can have two 14% feeds, 14% protein feeds, but they can have completely different qualities. So looking for something with a high lysine content, or your soybean is going to be important. No, I'd say the cooking is the most important, and then the levels of your vitamins and minerals. Because again, if there's a cheaper feed there, is it cheaper because you need to feed a lot more of it to get to the levels of vitamins and minerals your horse needs every day? So that's fine if your horse needs a lot of feeding, but if he doesn't, do consider that as well.
Perfect. And then just one last question for you, Lorraine. This lady has a 20-year-old horse. He's a bit sluggish, can get really hot with feed. Can you recommend a feed for him? So he can be sluggish, but does tend to get hot with feed. So trying to find somewhere in the middle. Yeah,
look, I suppose at 20, and you can have a really fit and strong 20-year-old, so he mightn't be an old 20. But if he's getting a little bit sluggish, is it because he's not recovering quick enough after exercise? So with older horses, we know that they need a little bit more protein in the diet because they don't digest it as efficiently as a younger horse. So I would say with him, the first thing I would do is put him on a balancer, because that the question kind of implies he gets hot with feed. So she doesn't tend to feed him too much concentrates. So the balancer is a great way to start, because you're making sure you're getting the vitamins, the minerals, and the amino acids into the diet. So I would say 100 to 150 grams per 100 kilos body weight. So anywhere between 500 grams and 1 kilo, depending on the size of the horse. Start with that. That's going to be completely free of starches and sugars, essentially. So it's not going to make him excitable. But if he's kind of back to where he needs to be, that could just do it. If you feel he needed a little bit more, you could feed something halfway that it doesn't have lots of cereal grains, something like our Horse Care 10, where you're getting a kind of balance of both. But the balancer might be a good place to start, because if he is a little bit sluggish, it could just be a deficiency in a key vitamin or mineral.
Lorraine, if people do make slight changes to their horse's diet, how quickly or how soon would you expect to see a change in, say, for their temperament or their energy levels? Does it take, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks to kind of see the benefit? I think we're also used to kind of getting the instant results. Is there a bit of patience required to see the impact a change can make?
Look, if you're talking about kind of temperament, you'll see it quite quickly. So if you have a horse on a really high cereal diet and you change him to a diet that's completely free of starch, he should be more settled in himself quite quickly. If that horse, though, was on a very high starch diet and it's had negative implications for his hindgut, he mightn't improve as quickly. So he might need a digestive support supplement and 4 or 6 weeks on a lower starch diet to start to see his form improve, that he's a little bit happier in himself. If you're adding oil to a diet, you tend to see that in kind of 7 to 10 days through their coat, and more as time goes on. So it really depends what you're changing and how quick the effect is.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions for now. And like we said, if anyone else wants to follow up with anything further, by all means, contact us through our social media channels or ask the experts on the Red Mills Horse website and the Foran Equine website there, where, again, we've got extensive resources with where this webinar, the recording, will be hosted, but also there's loads of articles covering lots of different subjects and going into a little bit more detail in some of the areas that we covered tonight. And if there are any other topics that you'd like more information on, again, send us a message, and that's something that we can focus on for future webinars. But for this evening, just thank you very much to everyone who has joined. Huge thank you to Lorraine for preparing tonight's presentation and taking the time to deliver it this evening. And to the whole team at the AIRC, like I said, it's a cracking partnership. We really appreciate the support from all the gang, and we look forward to future events. I know we've got the Dressage Championships to look forward to as well. So again, huge thank you to everyone for the continued support, and to Louise and Elaine for joining us this evening. And yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Lorraine.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Bye.